From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. It's our annual summer fiction show with a former Clinton insider and a former Wall Street trader. Murder and Intrigue in Washington, a thriller from Webb, Hubbell, and then a dark look into the lives of 7 traders during the dot-com stock market bubble. That's with Jared Dillian, former Lehman Brothers trader. Washington to Wall Street, take them to the beach for great summer reads all today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Webb Hubbell was Associate Attorney General in the U.S. Justice Department under President Clinton. He was Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, Mayor of Little Rock, and Managing Partner in the Rose Law Firm with fellow partner Hillary Rodham Clinton. Served a stint in prison for expense account irregularities from his law firm days. He's the author of Friends in High Places, Webb Hubbell and the Clintons' Journey from Little Rock to Washington, D.C. He's on his show for that book. He's also the author of 2 prior works of fiction, When Men Betray and Ginger Snaps, and the latest work is right off the presses, in fact, A Game of Inches, a Jack Patterson filler. Welcome back, Webb. Always great to have you.
Thank you, Jim, for having me. I look forward to it this morning.
And it's as I say, as you know, I don't read fiction, so I really enjoyed my one shot at it this summer, and I couldn't put it down. And, you know, maybe from politics to fiction isn't that far apart.
It's not. It's not, especially these days. You know, it seems like everybody's spouting fiction.
Is this your calling now?
I'm enjoying myself, immensely. And it's not often that somebody my age is able to say that. So I guess so.
I guess give us the overview on who Jack Patterson is first. He's kind of like a legal James Bond, the way you're, kind of serializing him.
Well, Jack is began as a mild-mannered antitrust lawyer in Washington, D.C., just keeping his head down and practicing boring law. And he keeps getting drawn into situations by his friends, and he's now become this high-profile criminal defense lawyer. He, in his first book, he was defending a good friend who murdered a U.S. senator. In the second book, he's defending a world-famous chemist who's busted for marijuana. And in this new book, the NFL Rookie of the Year wakes up at the Mayflower Hotel in D.C., and there's a dead woman in his bed. And the doors are locked, and his fingerprints are all over the knife. It's a great,
almost like the O.J. Simpson case where the evidence was so overwhelming. Is there any of you in this book? The guy, he loves to eat. I don't know if you do. He's Arkansas Board by Administration, and I know you kind of came to that conclusion at the Rose Law Firm. There's prosecutorial abuse. You certainly suffered that. And there's kind of an irony. The character would never overbill. You kind of got in trouble for that.
Well, I think every fiction is a little autobiographical, and you rely on what you know. And so working at the Justice Department, practicing law for a lot of years, I write about what I know. So there's a little of Jack in me, but there's 50 Jacks who practice law in Arkansas who think they're Jack Patterson as well.
Let me ask you one thing. I interviewed Patty Davis on her fiction book, and it was really interesting. She says part of the joy for her is she doesn't know how it's going to unfold. It happens as she writes it. How do you come up with it? What's your approach? How's it work out?
That's very similar to the way I do it. I've been on panels with other authors, and a lot of them outline and know exactly how it's going to end before they begin. But I kind of get halfway through the book and then start asking the characters, how does this work? How are we going to get out of this mess?
Interesting.
And they begin to talk to you. They really do.
All right, let's get right to the storyline of Game of Inches.
Okay. I mean, as I said, the NFL Rookie of the Year is found with a dead woman in his bed. He doesn't remember where she came from. He doesn't remember how he got in bed that night, and nobody knows who she is. And Jack is drawn into it because his good friend, who's an Arkansas judge, partially raised the Rookie of the Year, and his name is Billy Clyde Hopper.
You throughout this, you put a lot of real-world stuff, which must have required a lot of research. Kind of interesting. First off, the athlete in criminal trouble is a hot topic. Right. Fantasy football is big in it, and it's become a big profit. You call it potential conflict of interest as well. The antitrust exemption, which gets you right into the lobbying and everything. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. And by the way, when you try and answer that jangle of questions, you immediately, or sorry, Jack Patterson immediately has intuition that the guy is not guilty. Is that realistic that an antitrust lawyer would develop that sort of smell?
No, probably not for an antitrust lawyer, but that's kind of the thing about Jack. He gets thrown into situations, and the evidence is so overwhelming, and it's almost too perfect. That's what he actually tells his associate. It's just too perfect. There's nothing for us to hang our hat on. But, I tried in this book, because I'm a former football player myself, to try to talk about some of the issues that are facing football today. And one of them is, of course, the violence on and off the field. Fantasy football, I think, is another thing that people need to be talking about. Is it going to change the character of the game? And then finally, I talk a little bit about concussions and CTE and what effect that's going to have on the game. And that's because I have friends who are suffering from it already. I played college ball with, and now we're suffering from CTE.
I think did you win a national championship?
We didn't. We played for it the year after I was there when I was a student coach. We did win the Sugar Bowl my last game against Georgia. Is part of your goal, by the way, when you go into fantasy football, you also talk the sex trade, Russian mob, all kinds of insider Washington stuff. Is part of it to sort of explain, unravel the truth? Well, it is to unravel the truth, but also to get people thinking. We see all these ads about fantasy football and say how much fun to go betting on what quarterback in the country is going to have the best statistics. But we don't think about the abuse. What do coaches, we know the players know who's buying them for fantasy football. Are their performances going to be modified based on fantasy football? Interesting.
Getting into Washington now, you show the tension that exists between Maine justice and U.S. attorneys, how a lot of business is done at parties, scandal, fascinating stuff. You're trying to expose that stuff, I assume, and also you immediately say, well, the prosecution's going to leak stuff right away, which obviously is a violation of the law. That happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
Jeez.
They've got a tremendous advantage already, but they try to leak stuff to the media so that everyone who walks into the courtroom on the day of the trial is convinced of the man's guilt, and it happens. I know from personal experience from a long way back.
Everyone's a suspect, which obviously kind of makes it cool, including the girlfriend of Jack Patterson.
Yeah, we introduce a new character, that being his current girlfriend. And that's another area where we talk about that I don't think people are aware of, that they're not just lobbyists in Washington, D.C. They're information brokers, people who just gather information and sell that information to major corporations.
And your goal is to kind of expose this, or just juice up the plot?
Well, no, it hopefully juices up the plot, but I think it's good for people to know. I try not to, express judgment. I just try to expose it and let people know what's going on. I have a conflict. I love football. I love to watch football. And yet I know the violence is affecting, people I know and love,
It's funny because I love football, right? But I have come to really have high disdain for Roger Goodell.
Well, I think it's bigger than Roger Goodell. That's what I'm trying to point out. And I think, and we talk about this in the book. What's going to happen when high schools and small colleges start saying we can't afford the program, we can't afford the liability insurance that's going to be required if our school has a football team.
So you can see this book has all kinds of tangents. Business Talk with Jim Campbell of the Biz Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. And we will talk some Hillary and more Jack Patterson coming right back. We're back with former Clinton political insider turned novelist Webb Hubbell. Let's go back to Jack first. Some interesting stuff in here too that, and we'll get. It sort of goes to where we were before, which is prosecutors fit the crime to their theory. That's a big issue, isn't it?
It is a big issue, and we've seen that happening a lot now, where prosecutors are convinced somebody is guilty, convinced it's happened a certain way, and they tend to ignore any evidence that goes the other way, and sometimes hide that evidence from the defense.
Justice not blind. You think there's two sets for rich and poor?
Oh, absolutely. I think the world knows that. Yes.
Kind of disillusioning, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now,
it's a shame. That's not the way the system was designed.
In the novel, and this is kind of interesting, it is such a perfect crime that you kind of say that's actually demonstration of framing.
I mean, when you look at it all, you go, this is too perfect. There's got to be something that just doesn't fit. And ultimately, we'll see if Jack finds out what doesn't fit.
And I tell you, that's one of the things about the book, because obviously your assumption is, well, this is, they're going to have to find a way to get this guy off because it's a novel. And you constantly are saying there's no way they're going to get this guy off.
Right. And sometimes I don't get them off. We'll let people have to read it to see.
The Razorback teammates that you talk about, I find that's also that gives you the basis for his Billy Hopper's teammates supporting him, even though it looks bad. That does it just rings with great authenticity. I remember following Bill Parcells, and Lawrence Taylor would get in trouble, and the first thing that would happen is Parcells would call the players on the team that he knew could help take care of them, and this is 30, 40 years after they played together.
And I have the same experience. When I was at my lowest, Jim, it was my Razorback teammates who were writing me letters and calling me and calling my wife and saying, what can we do to help? And, we get together on occasion, and it's just like a moment ago. And, with some of our friends who are suffering now from CTE, they're Razorback teammates who are there, once again. The first guy who wrote me in prison was my head football coach.
Because who was that back then?
Frank Broyles.
Yes, a legendary guy.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing stuff. All right, we'll switch over a little bit to 2016 politics, and then we'll come back to finish up with Jack. Now, I'm assuming you're not having any contact with Hillary during the campaign. Is that true? Or?
No, I'm not. I used to be the guy they'd call at the Justice Department and say, "Can the president be seen with this person?" I'm still kind of that person. It's just not politically correct for me to have any communication with Hillary, and having it for a long time.
Okay. Having said that, there's probably nobody that's worked more closely with her that knows her over the years. And obviously, a lot of her real personality doesn't seem to come out because she just isn't that open with the press at all. You think talk about her as a person, and do you think there's any chance she can be a great president?
Oh, I think there's a good chance she's going to be a great president because we've had lockjaw stalemate in Washington for so long, and she is able to cross the aisle and get people to work together. I think that's the one thing people miss about her or don't understand about her. I think the other thing, on one-on-one, people will tell you, she's warm and friendly and funny. and I can assure you that's the case. She's got a little of Al Gore in her when she gets on TV, but one-on-one, for me, one of the funniest guys I ever met was Al Gore, one-on-one. And I think the same for Hillary. I was
thinking that too, and Gore did not win, although he won the popular vote. How do you?
Well, there's some Democrats who still think he won, but he didn't get sworn in.
Do you? And this is an interesting thing to me. I think one of the weaknesses right now of Hillary is there's not something you can wrap your arms around her campaign or her program like Trump's, "Make America Great." Bill Clinton had that down. It's the economy, stupid. Right. But I think in office she might be more focused than him. How do you think that they would run the Oval Office? What's the difference between Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton?
Oh, Bill Clinton is one of the smartest men I ever knew, but especially his breadth of knowledge. He was all over the map, and if you were to talk to him today, he would know something about a faraway country that you've never heard about. Hillary is focused, and if the issue is the economy, if the issue is world peace, she won't get diverted. She won't get, off message. And that's the difference. They're both super intelligent. Bill's, I'd say, got more breadth, and she's got more depth.
Usually, as you know, and Clinton's an example of this, the change candidate wins. And Hillary obviously can't run as the change candidate with her experience, her time there, and Trump. Is that going to be an Achilles heel? And how do you beat a bully?
Well, we used to know how to beat a bully on the Sandlot, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Secret Service would let you do that. It's got to be more subtle than that. And, one of the sad things is if you repeat a lie long enough, and I think the Republican nominee has become a master at it, people begin to believe it. Name calling.
Yeah.
We all knew somebody growing up who was a bully and a name caller, but we wouldn't want to go have a beer with them, and we certainly wouldn't want them running the country.
And I always say that bullies are usually paper tigers, so I hope someone figures out how to puncture that. Oh, we get back.
You don't want to do a physical punch, but you'd like to find another way to put him on the deck.
And he's so thin-skinned, I think that they should be able to find that. Now, tell me as we get done, this kind of a book would make a sensational movie. Is that a goal? Is that a chance?
If you know somebody, have them please call me. But I'd love to see it, but I have so much fun writing the book. I don't think of a movie or TV, when I write them, but I do think they would be good movies. Is
writing a solitary thing, and you enjoy that? You don't have writer's block or anything?
Well, we all get writer's block somewhat, but it is very solitary, and I've kind of enjoyed that. I've got a little cubby hole where I live. I sit down in front of the computer about 4 hours a day and write novels.
And are you on to a next one already?
Yes, I'm about halfway through the next one.
Really? Is Jack back, or?
Jack will be back, yes. This time there's a murder on the 18th green at
Columbia
great. Country Club.
Which country club?
Columbia Country Club in Bethesda, Maryland.
That does exist?
Yes.
Oh, so you know the exact layout.
Yeah.
And people will find this amazing. When Webb was one of President Clinton's closest golf partners, you had to lug your clubs up the driveway of the White House to play golf with him.
I did. That was kind of, and one time I was lugging them out. Somebody says, "Who are you? Are you playing golf inside the White House?" I said, "No."
Great story. Well, thanks to Webb Hubbell again. Always great to have him. First of all, it's a great life story he's got, and now he's become a highly talented writer. You'll find the book hard to put down, and for a guy who doesn't read fiction, you can take that statement to the bank. The book is Game of Inches, a Jack Patterson thriller. It's published by Beaufort Books. Coming next, we'll go to Wall Street intrigue, leaving Washington intrigue. Thanks, Webb.
Thank you, Jim.
And we're back with more of our summer fiction show. moving from Washington to Wall Street. Jared Dillian making his second appearance on Biz Talk with Jim Campbell. He talked about his acclaimed book, Street Freak, Money and Madness at Lehman Brothers. He writes a market newsletter, The Daily Dirt Nap, for professional investors. He's an adjunct professor at Coastal Carolina University, which I mentioned. We had their head football coach on because he made millions in business before taking the coaching reins at Coastal. Jared's just-released book is All the Evil of This World, a novel.
In the beginning, I was a Coast Guard officer. I was a lieutenant in the Coast Guard, and I had no intention of staying in, and I was going to business school part-time, and what I did was I got a part-time job as a clerk on the floor of the Peacoast Exchange back in 1999. And that was my first introduction to Wall Street, was basically, running trade tickets and getting lunch and stuff like that, things you would do, back then in a intro-level job. It was also, great because I got to learn the hard stuff first. I got to learn all about options, which really helped me later in my career. And I went from there. I spent 7 years at Lehman Brothers. I ran index arbitrage. Actually, I didn't run index arbitrage. I traded index arbitrage for 3 years. And then I ran the ETF desk from 2004 to 2008. And then at the bankruptcy, I left and started my own financial newsletter, as you mentioned, the Daily Dirt Nap, and I've been doing that for about 8 years now.
And the world of trading exacerbated your issues, right?
Well, in Street Freak, it's a personal memoir, and I talk about how I'm bipolar, and I discovered this in 2006, and that sort of environment, the behavior of somebody who is bipolar, you just sort of blended in with everyone else, and I was kind of running around undiagnosed for a long time.
And interestingly, bipolar folks are often very creative, and here we are with a creative novel. Tell us why these dark lives matter, to borrow another phrase. Give us an overview of the story.
Well, it takes place in the year 2000, just 8 days away from the very top of the bubble, March 2nd, 2000. And that is the day that 3Com spun off Palm, if you remember the Palm pilots back then. It was sort of a smartphone without the phone part. Mm-hmm. That trade, just from a financial standpoint, had hair all over it because the 3Com owned all of Palm, and they spun off 5% of it. It was about 23 million shares, and basically the market valued Palm at more than 3Com, which is impossible. It implied a negative value for 3Com. So what you could do is you could buy 3Com and short Palm and wait for that to converge. Mm-hmm. But there were so many day traders and such just ripping Palm higher that it was impossible to short. Plus, you couldn't get a borrow. And the rates on the borrow were about 75% a year. So really, it was one of the craziest trades of all time. But, my window to that was the exchange floor out in San Francisco. And I said, this is it was one of those moments when it was right before I turned 26, and I saw what was going on, and I said, I have to write a book about this someday. I was 26 years old, and it took me a while to do it because I really had to progress throughout my career and get exposure to other sides of the business so I could write this book. So basically, the book is 7 characters, 3 of them in San Francisco, 2 at a bank in New York, and 2 at a hedge fund in Greenwich, Connecticut. And it's the trade as it happens. It involves all 7 characters, 7 chapters, each one written in the first person in a different voice. And you can see the characters from different angles, from different perspectives. It's very complex engineering behind the book.
And you sort of reverse engineered it, right? Going from the Greenwich hedge fund guy, putting him last, although he was the originator, right, of the trade.
Yep, correct. Yep.
Well, tell us a little bit about some of the characters, and it's amazing how many folks have to be involved in an options trade in one company.
Yeah, I mean it's a little, the book is a little bit. It's 16 years ago, so it's a little bit historical fiction now. I mean, nowadays it would be less exciting because it's just from computer to computer. So
and less drugs and sex, I assume.
So no, I mean the characters are really a variety of people. I mean for the clerk, I picked this this swimmer out of Berkeley who sort of pumps iron all the time and has this incredible sex drive. And then, for the market maker, I picked a guy who's a little bit of a loser, like he just kind of can't get ahead in life and just sort of, has a defeatist attitude. And then the third character was my favorite, is a kid from, Rockaway, New York, who just had a, terrible home life and was just a, massive drug addict, party-throwing guy, and was the biggest broker on the floor of the P-Coast. The fourth character was the head of derivatives trading at this fictitious bank called Kensington, and he's the biggest cheapskate in the world. Pretty interesting psychological issues there. And then the fifth character was a very young girl who just started out as a sales trader, who's probably smarter than any other character in the book, and she's experiencing incredible amounts of sexual harassment. And the sixth character was a guy whose life is just coming apart. He's involved in this terrible, terrible divorce, like one of the worst you've ever heard. And, for a guy who was the head trader at a big hedge fund, he's pretty much broke. And the last character is the portfolio manager at the hedge fund. And I think the only thing I'll say about him is that he is cursed by his own good luck.
It's a pretty amazing thing, and of course we are coming from Greenwich, so we like to view ourselves as the hedge fund capital of the world. And the great irony is this is a guy who's depressed because he can't find a way to lose on a trade.
Yeah.
What is that? This is the absolute height of the internet boom. In fact, the NASDAQ still hasn't gotten back to that $5,000 level, and yet all these people seem incredibly miserable.
It's super. It's funny you mention that. That was kind of how I experienced it, I guess. I mean, I experienced it at a very low level in the business, but I mean, this is really like an existential question. Like, everybody's getting fabulously wealthy, but does money really make you happy in an existential sense? And I mean, I think the answer is no. I mean, and it doesn't mean that the pursuit of money is necessarily a bad thing, but some of the philosophical issues are sort of talked about in the last chapter, but all money does is really make your life a little easier. It doesn't solve all your problems. So people really had very real and very messy lives in the year 2000. It was not perfect by any means.
And it's purposeful, and is this realistic that everybody seems to be on the absolute edge of emotional balance?
Well, I tend to be good at writing characters whose lives are out of control, including myself.
The interconnectedness of Wall Street obviously comes through this, but what's cool is the plot line is very parallel. So it's almost like you've got 7 lanes going, but they're all interconnected. Yeah.
When I started writing this book, my agent was helping me on it, and he, after I would say a year of this, he sort of figured out that he wasn't going to make any money off of it, and because it's a great book, but it's nothing's really, I think, ever been done like this before. I can't think of another book that's like it that really and it's not as simple as telling the same story 7 times. Mm-hmm. It's really not that. I mean, it's 7 different stories, and it's almost like, in some ways, it's a short story anthology.
Yes.
But it's but you do get to see the same event from 7 different angles, and it's utterly fascinating.
And in fact, it's exactly that, because you don't get the sense of a plot line so much as these different sort of stories. And you get some of the typical stuff, right? Like traders and sales guys trying to, fight over who adds the real value.
Yeah, that's actually, it's funny. Everybody who's read it, who's worked at a bank, says, the 4th chapter where they grapple with some of those issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are exact conversations that happen on trading floors all the time.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from the street? And is there a fundamental difference now in the whole behavior between then and 16 years later?
Oh, sure. The feedback has really been uniformly positive. I mean, I've had 1 or 2 people said like that just the sort of manic writing style was a little too much. But, the feedback has been positive. I mean, look, like 16 years is a long time. Like people just sort of recognize that the street is not what it used to be, And there's a couple of the reviews on Amazon have said, this is a great look at what Wall Street was like in 1999, 2000, but it's just not like this anymore at all. So it's really like a period piece. And actually, I dropped in some cool historical references along the way, just of people using CD players and music that they were listening to, and actresses and stuff like that.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Our last national segment coming right up. We'll have more on all the evil of this world. We've got the author of a new novel, All the Evil of This World, Jared Dillian. And that fact, my first question is, what do you mean about that title? I mean, are these people evil?
Well, I think if you read this book and you get to the end of it and you're like, these people are evil and they're scumbags and Wall Street is full of scumbags, I think you completely miss the point of the book. You completely miss the point. I mean, you could write the exact same book with teachers or nurses or anybody. I mean, people sort of have this view that, Wall Street people are just totally depraved. But that's kind of like what makes it into, the cultural lexicon, right? Mm-hmm. But, there's people like that in every occupation in the world. And furthermore, this is just people being people. And in some ways, it is a very honest book because you're getting a view into people's thoughts, the things that people think, the things that they do. It's very common.
So it's almost irony, the title.
Oh, it's absolute irony.
Ah, yeah, that's okay. That's great. Let's ask because it's great the way you interject Greenwich, Wall Street, and New York City, and San Fran. I kind of want to get your of how those are flavors, and I love the part, obviously being here in Greenwich, that these guys make unbelievable amounts of money, but they never seem to have any cash or anything because they all living over their means.
Yeah, I mean I sort of was exposed to that in when I was at Lehman Brothers. I mean, not everybody, but there were a lot of people who were getting paid seven figures who just they were overextended. And when the crash happened in 2008, they were in serious trouble. And I wasn't like that. I said to myself at the time, if you've been making that kind of money and you have financial problems because of this, then
you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Do you see any kind of interesting differences between hedge fund world, Greenwich, Wall Street, and San Fran?
And then in San Fran, well, just in terms of
just in terms of the types of people that populate each.
Honestly, I've been to both, and for my newsletter, I have subscribers in San Francisco and Greenwich, and I talk to them frequently. Really, I don't. I kind of don't. Mm-hmm. It's
same people populating all three.
Yeah.
What about women on Wall Street?
Well, are you talking about today or in 2000?
Both, from your perspective. And
well, I would say that up until there was, when the financial crisis happened, that was a big financial event, but it was also a big cultural event. And the culture on Wall Street, I would say between 2008 and 2011, rapidly changed. So a lot of the behavior that used to be acceptable before was no longer acceptable. So I think that, sort of my depiction of the type of sexual harassment that somebody might receive in 2000 was probably pretty accurate. But that would absolutely not happen today at all.
Fascinating. All right, well, we've got you here. We got to pick your brains on market insights because the Daily Dirt Nap is really well written and fascinating, and you obviously have a real breadth of knowledge. So the first obvious question is Brexit. What does it mean for us?
A lot of people have sort of extrapolated this out into European countries, or like France is going to exit, and the Netherlands is going to exit, and Europe's going to split apart.
The disintegration of the way.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think that's pretty good analysis. I think that, part of this is it's very complicated because the secessionist movement is based a lot on immigration, and the left would sort of call that xenophobia or racism.
Right.
But I mean, there's also good reasons to control the flow of people into your country without being racist. So I think there's a reasoned argument there. I think the more important aspect of this is that UK businesses are going to be out from under this pointless EU regulation that has been stifling the country, and capital goes to where it is treated best. I don't know if you noticed this, but this week the UK stock market, the FTSE, was up 2%.
Really, even though the pound was, even though the pound took a beating,
the FTSE was up 2% on the week. So, I think that in the medium to long term, the UK is once again going to be a destination for investment capital. Once all this stuff gets sorted out, the sort of short-term negative effects. I think this is a big of a deal as Mauricio Macri getting elected president of Argentina. I think it's a very important free market event. And
it doesn't sound like you think it's the negative that we think it is.
In the short term, it is.
But not in the long term.
No, not the long term.
Do you think we're in this populist revolution, in some senses low information voters that translate right back to Trump here in the U.S.?
Well, I don't know. I think there's probably, if you look at any political revolution, probably most of it is low information voters, whether it's right or left or in between. I mean, you could say the same thing about Bernie Sanders, right?
Interesting.
I think that's a lot of it. I haven't really made up my mind on whether the Donald Trump. Look, I'm not a fan of Trump.
Right.
I was having a discussion with my wife the other day. The guy speaks and writes like a 10-year-old.
Yes. His maturity is like a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really disturbing. Am I for low taxes? Yes. Am I for growth? Yes, but not. Him as a candidate, I'm just not really enamored of. So I haven't really decided how I feel about it. Look, I think if there was, my preference would be that Gary Johnson is elected president. I think if you look at the Libertarian ticket, you have two 80s 90s style two-term Republican governors running as Libertarians. That's basically a Libertarian in 2016 is like a George H.W. Bush style Republican in 1992.
That's fascinating. And not only is that fascinating, but Webb Hubbell said the same thing. He said there's a chance by the end of the election it could be between Hillary Clinton and Gary Johnson.
Yeah, I think there's too many permutations to tell. I mean, really, the important thing for the Libertarians is to get on the debate stage. I think if in 2016 with Trump and Clinton, if they can't get on the debate stage, then there's no point to having the party. They really have to do that, and they've been good at getting some. I mean, they were on, Johnson and Weld were on CNN the other day. They've been good at getting some press, but they're going to need more.
They're both very impressive. Thanks to Jared Dillian. His real gift for telling the truth and writing All the Evil of This World. It's a novel, his first, and it's just out. Our next show, coincidentally, we're going to be sticking with crime stories. Bobby Kennedy Jr. joins us, got a new book claiming his cousin Michael Skakel was framed for the murder of Martha Moxley. So this is a true crime story, and that murder occurred right here in Greenwich as well. Thanks to our fiction superstars this morning. Fiction Summer Show. We do it once a year. Webb Hubbell, Jared Dillian, thanks to our national audience for listening. See you next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. This is segment 5 overtime exclusively for Yale Radio WYBC. Thanks to Webb for staying with us. On a light note, tell us about how you and Clinton did your Christmas shopping.
Well, when we first started this, Bill would show up in my car. I would pick him up in a car, and he would have a list of 20 people to buy, and he had about 2 hours to do it on Christmas Eve. And we would go up into a small community in Little Rock called the Heights, where we knew some of the shop owners, and it was just an escape. We had fun. Every store had a little eggnog, and we were having a good time, so we ultimately got my friend Marcia Scott and my sister to be our drivers. and we would just go around and visit people, and it was a way for Bill to kind of connect with old friends he hadn't seen during the year who ran these shops and people out there, and they would know we were coming to shop, and they would have things prepared for him.
So there was still stuff left?
Oh, there was still left, yeah. And he pulled it off every year. So when at the year after, he was elected president, and now we're used to, entourages and Secret Service, and I saw the president-elect a couple of days before, and he said, "We're still going, aren't we?" I said, "You're kidding me. How in the hell are we going to do that?" And sure enough, I went to the governor's mansion where they were having the transition office, and we got in a Secret Service car, and off we went. And that's when he asked me to come to Washington on the way to Christmas shop.
He gave you 2 missions which you didn't have a chance to do at DOJ before you had to leave, which was to investigate the JFK assassination and whether UFOs exist.
Yeah,
Now,
who really shot JFK?
Yeah, now, I am 100% convinced that it was Oswald acting alone. Do you feel that, or?
I don't feel so good about that one, but I did get a picture of, there are still records that the FBI has, and there's a room full of records that still haven't been opened to the public.
On the JFK assassination?
On the JFK assassination.
Well, I can't see they can find anything on that. And obviously you didn't seem to have time to cure the UFO issue.
I didn't cure the UFO issue, but it's interesting. Of the one thing that I get calls about or random emails about, they still want to know what I found out about the UFOs.
Let's talk about some of the people now. You had Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and Hillary sort of considered at some point a tri-presidency with McClarty having to manage that. Was the White House chaos?
It was chaos. I mean, it was chaos. First of all, Bill was always running late. He and Mac was. It was like Mac was trying to herd cats. They were all. Gore had his own agenda. The president had his agenda, and plus, it's like something new every 5 minutes was coming in on the wires, and so it was kind of mad. I admire Mac for trying to take it on, because that's not the way it was back in Arkansas. You had a legislature back in Arkansas that met 60 days once every other year. And then after that, there wasn't really that much going on.
Congress should maybe take that up every other year, do less damage.
I think so. Now they did a lot of damage in 60 days in Arkansas, but they got it done. And I think that may be a good idea. But maybe we can get the new Speaker of the House to introduce that they only meet 60 days to every other year.
Let's talk a little bit scandals. Madison SNL with Jim and Susan McDougal and Whitewater. Whitewater seemed to never really be anything.
There wasn't anything to it. It was a failed land deal where Jim McDougal and the Clintons and another couple bought some raw land on the White River, and we're going to divide it into parcels and sell it off. And nobody bought, and so it was a failed land deal. The Clintons and everybody else lost money, but there was no scandal about it.
There was a $300,000 loan to Susan McDougal that David Hale, who ran he had the SBA venture group, said Clinton pressured him on, and he just made that up. He just lied.
He did make that up. I mean, he was under indictment. And he was just trying to figure out a way, well, if I can come up with a story, I can be a witness, and they won't send me off to prison. It happens. I don't know where David is these days, but I'm sure he regrets doing that.
One of the things I thought was that Whitewater was nothing, but chasing that rabbit kept him away from what I think was Clinton's real vulnerability, which was women.
I don't think that ended up that way.
Jennifer Flowers, it was interesting. You actually, what is it, your wife's sister's ex-husband, if I can follow that,
That's right.
Was dating Jennifer Flowers at the time,
and ultimately married her.
Really? And so they maintain, or this guy maintains, that what she was saying was true.
Oh, what she was saying was
true. About Clinton, that their relationship.
Well, Finus has been known to tell a few tales.
So you don't think you think?
Oh, I didn't. We had gotten used to. Finus was married to my sister-in-law, and he was a character, and ended up in New Orleans, and still is a character. But he did marry Jennifer for a while. But Finus can tell a tall tale or two
for a while. Let me ask you this, and how this impacted Hillary. You had the troopers come out. You had Paula Jones. You had Monica Lewinsky. How does Hillary Clinton deal with all that?
I think that's we talked. I think earlier about how she's private, and this has got to be painful for her. There's a new there's a new allegation a day. I don't know what it is about the Clintons that bring out the nuts, and most people's reaction to that is to get angry or whatever, and I think Hillary internalizes it and just deals with it by not saying a word. And I think sometimes you've got to let your anger out, and she probably does privately, but I just don't see it. I hadn't seen it.
And she stuck with him.
She stuck with it, yeah. I mean, there's so many allegations out there that are so outrageous, so painful, so awful, and yet if she reacts to them, then it gives them credibility. And so I know in my own case there are a few of those involving me.
There's you talk about the nuts. This in the radio station here, Clinton's War on Women by Roger Stone was sent to us, and there is a picture and comments in the book that you are Chelsea Clinton's father.
Okay.
Have you heard that one?
I have heard that one, and I've refused to comment. But for you, I'm going to tell you the truth. There's absolutely no truth to it.
That's a surprise, right?
No, but I haven't even said that. I didn't want to give it dignity.
Oh well, I'm honored. How can someone get away with printing that?
I don't know.
They know you won't sue them, or what?
I think they know I won't sue them. They know that more than likely, just like the Clintons, we don't want to give it credibility by acknowledging it or even the dignity of answering it.
It's a terrible thing. Terrible thing for Chelsea. For Chelsea to hear that stuff.
And my own family.
Yeah,
realize that there are two parties to this, and for both families, it's painful and awful. I can imagine what Chelsea's gone through, and there's absolutely no truth to it.
Obviously, there's no truth to that. Makes Betsy Wright. I want to ask you about her because here she is so dedicated to him. She called, I guess, fighting off the bimbo or whatever, and she doesn't get to go to Washington.
Well, she did go to Washington, but not in the administration.
Oh, okay.
And that was, she did. She actually went up and worked for a consulting firm for a while.
Would it have been, it just wouldn't have been good for her to be in the White House?
I don't think so. She, I love Betsy. Betsy and I were very close, and we worked very close together for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider Betsy one of my best friends. But I think they were concerned she didn't work well with some people who were already in the White House, and I think that a lot of people are intimidated by strong women, especially back then. I think things have changed. I think these days she'd be fine, but back then there was still a bias against strong women, and Betsy's certainly one of them.
She certainly knows where all the skeletons are buried, and she had all these.
That's what they used to say about me too.
She has all these files on all the various subjects, whether it be scandal.
Turned those files over.
That sounds good. Well, she turned them over to you, and they were in your basement for a while. But I got the sense you never even read them.
They were all there.
But did you look at them ever?
I did on occasion look at them. Okay. I had to because every now and then something would come up. If you remember,
yeah.
It was Father's Day, and all of a sudden Parade Magazine was going to run an article that Bill had a brother he didn't know about. And so I had to go down to my and dig out on the allegations that he actually had a half-brother that he didn't know about.
Is there stuff in there? And obviously, you can use attorney-client privilege, right? So you would never.
I have attorney-client.
You would never divulge it. But is there stuff in there that would be bombshells?
No, not now. Not after
everything's come out. Yeah.
Ken Starr spent $77 million looking at all that stuff. So there isn't anything in those files that hadn't been aired and
why did Ken
to death.
Ken Starr and Hickman Ewing, who I guess was the one that personally prosecuted you, why did they basically harass you, drag you to D.C. all the time to try to get you to turn on them?
Well, Jim McDougall had told them that Webb Hubbell knew where all the bodies were buried. I read that in the paper and said, "Oh my gosh, here it comes." And I read that even before I was charged. And they were convinced. I don't think Ken Starr was. I think Hickman Ewing was, and other members of the staff, that if they could just get Webb Hubbell to turn, then they would discover where all the bodies were buried.
Would you have, if you had lied and turned, would you have had no prison sentence or something?
Oh, I'm sure of that. But
okay, so you actually had to go to jail to protect, because you were honest in that aspect.
That's right. I mean, I would ask them, "What in the hell do you think I know?" They would never answer that question. But tough times, tough experiences make us better people. So I'm not regretful or bitter at all.
Susan McDougall also got shoved in jail, and she wouldn't talk. Did you know her at all?
I didn't know her beforehand. I've gotten to know Susan. Susan is the chaplain at the University of Arkansas Medical Science Campus.
Really?
And
was she treated unfairly?
Oh, yes. Susan. They were convinced Susan. I don't know what they were trying to get out of Susan, but they locked her up in a county jail, which is much worse than a federal prison, for months and months and months, trying to get her to talk.
What was a day in prison like for you?
Well, at first it was shock and fear, but then it became a routine like anything else. I counsel people who are about to go to prison, and I try to tell them it's all a matter of attitude. And you'll discover that most of the people in prison are just like you and me. They've done something wrong. They're dealing with it in ways that are different. Some deal with it well, like I think I did. Some don't do so well. Some are in shock the whole time and develop what I call the prison shuffle, where they just keep their head down and are very depressed the whole time. There's always this sense of fear that you're going to be attacked or something like that.
And how often did you get to see your family?
Well, where I was, you could see them once a week. Of course, that meant my wife driving up for 4 hours to get there. Most of the prisons are not anywhere near close. And then, of course, if you traveled, and like I had to, you didn't get to see them at all. And it was a mixed bag. Every time your family came to see you, they also had to leave, and that was a reminder that you really were in prison. So a lot of guys, after a while, would discourage their family from coming because it was just too painful.
Did your kids have psychological problems while you were gone?
My kids are stronger and better. And my kids are great. Mm-hmm. I'm very fortunate that my kids have dealt with all these issues very, very well.
Turning to the State Department for a sec, do you think Hillary made fundamental mistakes on the Benghazi thing, or is this another thing that's sort of been blown up unfairly in your mind?
I think that one has really been blown up. I don't know what they're trying to prove there at all. That somehow she on purpose let people die. I don't think there's any evidence of that. What we tried after Waco, and what I would hope the Benghazi hearings would do, and any of these hearings would do, is we learn from mistakes. If we made mistakes in Benghazi, you can't undo them, but we can learn from them. But it doesn't look like they're trying to learn from the mistakes. It looks like they're just trying to blame somebody, and especially since Hillary is running for president, they're trying to blame her.
That's good.
I don't think there's any there.
All right, let's go to the other side. Accomplishments. There's been criticism that she traveled the most of anything, but what does that mean in terms of accomplishments? What would you say are her fundamental accomplishments? And I think one thing, she had her hand tied behind her back because a lot of the policy was made right in the White House. Right.
I mean, the Secretary of State is essentially there to implement the policy of the president. You know, Bill Clinton's Secretary of State implemented his policies, and her job was to implement the president's policy. So if you're critical of the policies in the Middle East or elsewhere in the country, you have to look to President Obama. I'm frankly not anyway. And the same thing for Bill Clinton or any other president. I mean, George Bush's Secretary of State implemented his policy. So, but to get back to your question, accomplishments, I don't think there was any more respected Secretary of State in the world than Hillary Clinton. And I think people welcomed her. And when she spoke, whether it was to Putin or in the Middle East or in the Far East, to China, which is, the 100-pound gorilla in the world right now, they respect Hillary Clinton. And they know what she says is important and will be followed. And I think the fact that we've been in some minor wars, but the fact that we're essentially still a world at peace with a bunch of crazies going around trying to control our actions is quite an accomplishment.
Now, one of the things I really admired about President Clinton accomplishments was that he has the only balanced budget since Eisenhower. And people say the Democrats are irresponsible. Now, the story's out there, Hillary's much more liberal and all this stuff. Do you think she will have a growth-oriented, responsible fiscal policy?
Yes. I think it'll be more responsible than anybody can imagine. She's pretty conservative with her money.
Yeah.
And people have kidded about that, but she is very conservative, and she comes from a very conservative background in her family when it comes to finances and money. And she will rely on people who will have a very balanced way of dealing with the debt. And I wouldn't be surprised if she's president for the next 8 years, we don't have a balanced budget again.
And to me, the Republicans are the most irresponsible fiscal stewards. So I hope you're right. I've always said if I know that Bill Clinton's whispering in her ears on fiscal policies, I'll feel very comfortable. Let me give you a chance as we finish now to hype a little bit your two thrillers. Tell us about them.
All right. Yeah, please do. And I'm just finished my third one, so I'm excited about it as well. But they're legal thrillers. The first one is set in Little Rock, called When Men Betray. And in that case, it begins with a best friend of a D.C. lawyer named Jack Patterson murdering the U.S. Senator from Arkansas in the Capitol Rotunda.
Wow, great.
And Jack is forced to come back to Arkansas and discover why his best friend, who is also the Senator's chief of staff, murdered him, in plain view of everyone else. And it tells you a lot about Arkansas, the Arkansas interconnectedness we talk about, and it's also a book about friendship and loyalty and betrayal. And then the second one is Ginger Snaps, which is a lot of fun. Again, Jack Patterson is forced to come back to Arkansas, and this time to defend his wife's best friend, who is a world-famous chemist, who is busted for growing marijuana in his backyard. And all of a sudden, the federal government is not saying he's busted for growing marijuana, he is a terrorist.
Oh.
And Jack has to come back to Arkansas once again, assemble his team, and figure out why this world-renowned chemist is being called a terrorist.
Well, you've just sold me because I don't read fiction, but it sounds great. I nicely have your books now. What's the third one?
The third one is the third in the Jack Patterson series. This time it's set in D.C., and a pro football player wakes up in his room at the Mayflower, and next to him is a woman, and she's dead.
Wow. Sounds like
and
this could be
people say,
movie.
well, they can believe that could happen. Well, this is another interesting case where Jack Patterson is kind of drawn into defending this NFL rookie wide receiver who played football, by the way, at Swanee, Tennessee.
It would seem to me, Webb, these could be potential movies.
Oh, I'd love it. Love it. If you know any movie producers, please let me know, and I'll send them a copy.
I just interviewed Brian Grazer. You know who he is? He's Ronnie Howard's partner at Imagined Entertainment.
Oh, wow.
They have like 400 Emmys and Oscars between. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. But we've had a great time. This is want to thank Webb Hubbell again. Let's get that other book in again, Friends in High Places, Webb Hubbell and the Clintons' Journey from Little Rock to Washington, D.C., and again, Ginger Snaps, When Men Betray. What's the name of the third one?
The third one's tentatively called A Game of Inches.
A Game of Inches. When's it coming out?
Hopefully next spring.
Okay. The podcast of this 60-minute commercial-free version will be available right after we get off the air. You can get it at iTunes. Search Business Talk with Jim Campbell. You can go to WYBC.com at Yale Radio as well. Thanks again to Webb Hubbell. We gave him quite a workout. Thanks to our loyal Yale audience for staying with us on Overtime. And again, we'll see you all next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell.